Welcome to Perspectives, the vodcast of the American Mental Health Counselors Association with the National President and Interim CEO/ED, Dr. Beverly Smith. This vodcast will bring to you the perspectives of clinical mental health counseling as it pertains to ethics, public policy and legislation, multiculturalism and social justice, as well as leadership and advocacy. This vodcast will feature experts in the clinical mental health counseling field to enhance the work of clinical professionals and to inform the public. The American Mental Health Counselors Association advocates for over 130,000 licensed clinical mental health counselors in the United States who are licensed to assess, diagnose, and treat mental disorders. We are the only organization working exclusively for clinical mental health counselors. Join the Perspectives for insight from experts on wellness and daily living, current clinical research, integrative healthcare, as well as how to maintain personal, family, and organizational wellness in an anxious and ever-changing world. Let's connect and hear the perspectives.
Hello and welcome to our vodcast called Perspective. I'm Dr. Beverly Smith, President and Interim CEO of the American Mental Health Counselors Association. We launched our vodcast to bring you perspectives of experts in the field of counseling. And today on AMHCA's vodcast titled Perspectives, we have a guest with us, Dr. Constantin. She is the board chair of the licensed counselors in the Virgin Islands, and she's also the founder, organizer, CEO of Beautiful Dreams LLC. So, Dr. Constantin, tell us a little bit more about yourself, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Beverly Smith, for having me today and for having a discussion around the profession. I'm Dr. Constantin, licensed professional counselor. This is actually my second profession. I spent 14 years building systems in Gwinnett County schools in the state of Georgia, working with children presenting with neurodevelopmental disabilities as well as cognitive disabilities. Somewhere along the line, I recognize a very, very slight difference between the presentation of children in special education needing additional supportive services and those who present with behavioral health issues. So I decided to combine both of those components and founded Beautiful Dreamers Behavioral and Educational Center 5 years ago.
Awesome. So
I am now the board chair for the first Virgin Islands Board of Licensed Counselors and Examiners that was established approximately 2 years ago. Since then, we've been successful in getting about 23 licensed professional counselors, marriage, family, and therapists, and 1 substance counselor.
awesome. So you are a leader among leaders. So thank you for what you're doing here in Georgia, Gwinnett, if I recall you say correctly.
Yes, Gwinnett County.
Mm-hmm. As well as in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So thank you again for the work that you're doing. You mentioned about the intersectionality of those with a learning disability or disability with mental health. Could you talk a little bit more about that intersectionality?
Absolutely. So in special education, we identify 13 classifications around our building of documentation for students who are placed on an IEP. And typically these classifications are separate and apart from each other, except for 2 components where we tend to put our children with emotional presentations, and that's emotional behavioral disorder and other health impaired. What we've recognized, however, is whether they're placed in these 2 categories or they're placed in the other 11, they all have an emotional presentation that we have to deal with. So these students are either referred out to the school counselor, who may be able to support what their needs are, the emotional needs, or we make referrals out to the community for a behaviorist who can support the child and the family. A lot of times when we have children in special ed, we don't understand the implications of not just on the child, but on the family. And there's so many variables around that. So there is a lot of commonality between the two. They're more common or similar than they're different.
Okay. And so you talk about the intersectionality, which leads me to wonder and think about the system or your perspective on universal screeners for students for anxiety and depression, which can maybe be a good tool to help provide additional treatment for those who have an IEP, or even in some cases, minimize the services that they can receive. Because if there's a screener for anxiety or depression, if it's a part of the context, then will that screener help to provide additional treatment or reduce treatment?
Yes, and in the perfect world, that makes a lot of sense. Dr. Beverly Smith, fortunately and unfortunately, I'll start with the unfortunate part of things. Schools are heavily focused on academics. Schools are focused on meeting all of the curriculum as intended, because that tracks whether or not students are successful in moving from one grade to another with all of the assessments that we take here in Georgia. So teachers and school counselors are left with making sure that these children are on a pacing guide to meet the educational requirements. A lot of time is not given to risk factors and screenings to help with the development of the whole child. We don't have enough time during the school hours to focus on that. So when our children are placed on an IEP on either one of those sections, it kind of now opens the doorway to have conversations around, what does that mean? Is this appropriate to be supported at school, or do we need to do a referral to a community-based mental health agency?
And that's good to know, and that's good. When we're talking about mental health services, and again, talking about screeners for anxiety or depression and so forth, or for other things, do you think if we did a better job on screening on the front end, it could reduce the numbers of those who have an IEP? Because sometimes we have a disproportionate number of certain students receiving an IEP. So just wondering, I don't know if I explained that or asked that correctly or not, but share your thoughts about that.
Yes, I think you are right, indeed. For Black and Brown children, they are highly represented on the particular categories. And the first one is EBD, which is emotional behavioral disorder. We know as clinicians that trauma presents in different ways. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, those variables are not taken into account when IEPs are formed or when the team is placed together. As an educator, we've always looked at the impact of the behavior on education and on education only. So if we're able to separate those two, we'll be able to dive into, why is this child behaving? What experiences have this child had? What type of home environment and other contributing factors that may present this way? But we don't have the flexibility to do that in the school system, because the focus again is on academic gains. Let us simply buffer what we're seeing, try to make this child as inclusive as we can as possible, and move on to the next pacing chart, move on to the next subject, and keep it going.
And that's true. And I know some school systems here in Metro Atlanta area implemented, and nationwide, implemented a social emotional learning component, which was supposed to help provide was supposed to help. And I think it did to a certain extent, but there's a lot more that needs to happen when you talk about really educating and walking the journey for a student and their families in regard to social emotional learning. It's not a quick fix.
It's not. And it's not one particular department. It's not the special ed department. It's not the school counseling department. It's the entire school. We know a lot of our children see or spend more time with our teachers. Well, how much education do they have around social and emotional learning? How well is it infused in the curriculum? What type of mindfulness activities are being implemented and embedded in the curriculum? What type of tools and coping mechanisms are we given to these teachers who can then pass on to the students? What level of training do they have? The word social emotional sounds good, but how is that impacting teachers? Are we giving them the right supports that they need when we have diverse learners in the classroom with varying backgrounds? So exactly how does that translate for a teacher who is being graded based on students' performance, who's being evaluated based on retention of the students and what these grades look like, an assessment grade? So truly, are we really putting a focus on social emotional? How are we going to balance those scales?
And you're right, because we can have some training, some awareness around SEL components, but at the same time, teachers are not being measured on SEL. They're being measured on their content. What progress did they make? Did they move the needle with the kid education-wise from point A to point B or point Z? So that is important. Having SEL as part of the fabric of the institution, I think, will make a difference. Having it a part of instruction to the point of we're not kind of singling out and saying it's SEL, but we're just going to embed it in how we teach, how we interact with students, how we introduce new concepts, how we encourage them. So I think that is important. And also, again, talking about the culture of the school, how do we embed it just in the culture of who we are? And as licensed therapists, as we both are, I think it's part of our nature to do things from a standpoint that's SEL. When we speak, when we talk, we're engaging people, but we're trained to do that and to recognize when it's received or when it's not, and then how do we navigate from that point, which we know how to do. But oftentimes educators haven't been trained in that capacity or not in depth enough. They need more training with that.
They do.
And so you've been in this into mental health care for how long again?
I would say about 5 years.
Okay.
So I'm a newbie.
That's fine.
On the block. doing other things, an extension of mental health care. Did a lot of crisis work in Haiti after the earthquakes, and certainly a lot of work after the hurricanes of Irma and Maria of 2017 in the Virgin Islands. But actively doing this work in mental health care, it's been about 5 years.
Well, you've hit the ground running and you've done a lot in those 5 years. So hats off to you for your work that you do in the school system and incorporating, mental health. In reference to the school system, how do you select an agency to refer out? If you have to refer a student or family, what do you consider in making that referral?
So I'll start with the Virgin Islands because we're very, very, very busy and active there. So our referral process in the Virgin Islands is dependent on cultural intentionality. Okay. So we use the word cultural competency, which we have found is not significant to us. It doesn't benefit our community. So because I've taken a course in cultural competence, well, how does that translate in how I deliver service to folks who don't look like me, haven't had my experiences? So instead, I like the word, or I've used the word cultural intentionality, because it says to me that you're making a concerted effort to get to know the folks that you're supporting. You understand their life's path. You understand how they navigate through systems that are very different from your own. Unfortunately, most of the counselors we've licensed are not locals. They're transplants. They're from the mainland, and the Virgin Islands is a beautiful place to live and work. So they moved to the Virgin Islands with the best intentions of providing care, but we all have biases. Not only that, but we're all limited by our own experiences. So if I'm going to send or refer a client to an agency, I have to ensure that the agency is able to speak that client's language. And if that's not going to happen, then we'll do the best that we can to service the clients in-house.
Okay. And I know, generally we do similar things when a school system, for example, in Georgia, refer out. I know some school systems, would make sure that the agency, has the capacity to meet the needs of the student. There's some agencies that may not have individuals to work with someone who has, an IEP and have mental health challenges. And so that's important to make sure that we do our due diligence as a good fit. And we always tell parents, it's a referral, but now you can go and research and do your due diligence as well. That's equally important. But you mentioned a word of cultural intentionality versus cultural competencies. Just highlight that a little bit more in the differences that you see within those two.
Okay, so when all my trainings and all I've been able to process as cultural competence is having an awareness of somebody's varying backgrounds that are always different from our own, even if we may have we're Black women, but we've navigated this world very differently. I'm from South America, grew up in the Virgin Islands, and now I live on the mainland part-time, where your background hasn't encompassed any of these things. So while we may be grouped together as Black people, we still don't necessarily understand our plight, our experiences, what makes me different from you, and so on. So we can have these continuing ed units and cultural competence and the awareness around varying cultures and some of the implications of what that means, right? And still be very comfortable in who we are without seeking opportunities. And that is the difference. We have to be intentional about seeking opportunities to immerse ourselves in people's cultures. I'm not asking for folks to be an expert in every single culture, but I'm expecting folks to be intentional on such opportunities. For example, a lot of some of our clinicians will move to the Virgin Islands and still live on the outskirts of the island, hanging out with each other, sending their children to schools that are not necessarily where my children will attend, where the masses will attend, or they don't hold activities where they get to understand the culture in its authentic sense of being. Is a very, very, very big difference to process a culture just by coming in and just enjoying the opportunities, the sun, the sand, the food, and to attend varying carnival and different events. It's another to have conversations with grandmothers and gatekeepers and to be a part of the school system. So when you seek out such opportunities and you make yourself a part of the process, then you become intentional about learning about somebody's background that are vastly different from you.
Okay. I like the word intentionality, cultural intentionality. So I will be adopting that, looking through those lenses, because when you talk about being intentional and embracing, the profession and people of the profession and those who are seeking services, you do have to be intentional.
Yes.
About the embrace and what does that embrace look like?
Even if it makes you uncomfortable. Even if it makes you uncomfortable.
And uncomfortable is not necessarily what we may consider a bad or unhealthy.
Exactly. We should be using discomfort to channel the areas of limitations that we hold, the things we're not quite comfortable with, as in we don't have enough information about. So I think that's our body telling us, hey, maybe I need to spend a bit more time learning the Virgin Islands culture, which is really, there is no one particular Virgin Islands culture, right? Virgin Islands sit nicely between the Caribbean and the US mainland. So we have a lot of movement from countries and islands coming into the Virgin Islands and making Virgin Islands home. And we have a lot of movement from stateside coming in and making the Virgin Islands home. So there's so many different movements and aspects and languages. We have a huge Haitian population on St. Thomas and not so much on St. Croix, where on St. Croix we have a huge Puerto Rican community presented. We have some Santo Domingo presentation on St. Thomas, but their dues are very different, even if they speak the same language. So because of that, it makes it very unique in how we support the communities of the Virgin Islands.
Okay. And so as you're supporting the communities in the Virgin Islands, do you see that there is a need for support? Is there a need for licensed professional counselors to be there and provide service? Is there a need?
Absolutely. There is a need for providers. We have been identified to be an area of healthcare shortage for the past 8 to 10 years. Our past 3 governors have identified the Virgin Islands being a mental health crisis. So there is a need. The difference is, however, we have had psychologists for the past 25, 30 years doing the work only in our community. We've had the presence of social workers, but they've always been attached to an agency. They would work through the hospital. So they would work through Department of Health, Department of Education, Human Services. So social workers are now going into independent practice, whereas that never used to happen in the past. So the community is well aware of the presence of psychologists. They're well aware of the presence of social workers and where they can find them. We are the new kid on the block, and people don't quite know where we fit or who we are. A lot are asking about, what's your professional identity? Well, how are you different from a social worker versus a psychologist? And to complicate matters further, is some of us are actually doing a lot of the evaluation and assessments as psychologists. So how are you different from psychologists? And what benefit do you bring to the scale or the spectrum of behavioral health service? So the board, being an active voice in the community, has been working to establish and to answer these varying questions. We're only 4 members strong. We're lacking 3 members right now, but we've been very, very, very successful in having these conversations. Certainly, we need to do a lot more work and on the ground, and having town halls and having meetings and meeting with teachers and so on. But our profession itself, licensed professional counselor, is a new phenomenon, and they're well aware of school counselors as well. In fact, we have a ACA, American Counseling Association, VI chapter in the Virgin Islands, but it's composed of only school counselors with 1 licensed mental health counselor. So we really have not yet formulated our identity in the Virgin Islands.
It's interesting because there is a national organization titled the American School Counselor Association. And so hopefully, we can all begin to collaborate and see how do we best provide services and advocate for the profession. Because if you have individuals there who are school counselors, definitely that organization would be helpful for them to be visible. And we are trying to charter an AMHCA chapter. We are trying to get off the ground.
Absolutely. And they have been the foundation at which we're able to springboard into the board. It's been the school counselors doing this work prior to our arrival. So kudos to them for having the intention or having the passion around recognizing the need for clinical mental health services.
Well, I think that's important. And again, I think that lends itself to collaboration. For example, on this Thursday at 1 p.m., we're having a collaborative event, a webinar, AMHCA, the American Mental Health Counselor Association, with the American School Counselor Association, so that we begin to collaborate and coalesce and provide a service to the public. We've all seen mass shootings, we've heard about it, we've experienced vicarious trauma. And so we wanted to provide a service that would be good for professionals and just talking about compassion fatigue, but also just reminding everyone about the grief process and the informed trauma care that we do. And so hopefully that will be an example and a start, and that
yes,
will out into encompass other organizations as well as geographical locations as well. But it's a virtual webinar, so we'll make sure we post that, so that can be a resource. When you talk about counseling and those who have various rights to practice, do various things, is the scope different for various professionals? And if so, maybe some reasons for it. And then how do you move forward in ensuring everyone has appropriate scope of practice?
Is the scope different in terms of providing services in the Virgin Islands?
Yes.
No, specializations are the same. What we're lacking is counselors who are able to speak other languages. So while I am so happy to say we've licensed 23, 25, but how many have the language of French Creole or French or Spanish?
Mm-hmm.
No one, right? So I speak French Creole. My clinical director is Haitian, so she has a language, but that's it. So when we're talking about providers, we may license 100 providers, but how many have a specialization or ability to meet a particular subset, the needs of a particular subset of a community? And those are the challenges that we're having on ground. We need Haitian speaking clinicians. We need Spanish speaking clinicians. We need people who are local to the region of the West Virgin Islands. It's wonderful to have counselors from the outside coming in, but they cannot. And I am not going to, I'm not going to be politically correct in saying this. They cannot adequately meet the needs of a community they don't necessarily understand. Mm-hmm. That is why the bill or the amendments we're pushing later this month is to create a pathway to have locals get trained and educated and supervised in their community so they can attend to the needs of their community.
Understandably so, and that's important to understand the context of the individuals and those that you're serving, to have the full understanding. And sometimes you can't get that until you have been a part of, and until you're able to really listen and hear and tap in on what is it they're saying, what is the actual need. And sometimes having that eye or boots on the ground makes a difference. Now, for those who are not a part of, the community there in VI, but want to be a part, want to serve, have the compassion to serve, is there such an immersion opportunity or program for those individuals who may have great resources to offer?
That's a very good question. I think we've been so bombarded with getting the board formed and processing licenses that we haven't considered, well, okay, so we want people to be cultural intentional. Well, what does that look like? How do we develop programs for folks who are truly interested in learning the culture and coming in and supporting the needs of the culture? So that is a conversation we're having. There is an individual we have identified at the local university who's phenomenal in being a gatekeeper to the culture. So that is something we are working on. We're not quite there. However, if there are folks interested, they can reach out to the board, they can reach out to Department of Licensing and Consumer Affairs, they can get on my website, send me an email, reach out. There is always something we're doing that they can start to become a part of.
Got it. And that makes sense. That makes sense, and understandably so. Because part of providing the service, again, means that we do it in, as some would say, culturally competency manner, but cultural intentionality, that is important. So again, I love that new term for me, using that and shifting to cultural intentionality, because then that would lend itself to, how do I participate in an immersion program? How do I learn more? How do I understand better the lived experience of the individuals that I'm serving? And that is true for, I guess, the U.S. Virgin Islands. That is true for mainland as well.
Absolutely.
Live on the west coast, north, south, east coast, culture is still different for some. You mentioned, like I said, Gwinnett, Georgia, Metro Atlanta area.
Very different.
Very different. You could go
Very.
10 minutes in difference. You can go an hour, vastly different. You think you're in another country.
Absolutely. In fact, people say you don't live in Atlanta. I dare say, where do you live in Atlanta? But I'm in Beaufort, right? You're like, nah, that's not. It's a totally different culture. Absolutely.
It is a different culture. And so, what would you say to individuals who maybe wanted to become more culturally intentional? What would you say to those individuals? What recommendations would you share?
So we're the wonderful thing about this is we're so interconnected
Mhm.
with the use of the internet and social media. So we have activities that have been made available on YouTube. So you can just jump on YouTube and type in the U.S. Virgin Islands and programming and activities and Department of Education, Department of Health, Department of Human Services. What is the presentation on the surface? What does that look like? What are really the issues challenging the community? All of that information can be found online. Of course, there's a huge difference in reading about it and then getting to have a conversation about it. So I would say read as much as you can and then get in touch with a clinician or someone who's doing the work. And again, all that information can be found online.
Okay. And in regards to advocacy, is there a particular area that you would love to see more advocacy as it relates to the counseling profession, whether it's in the mainland or VI?
My focus has been so much in the Virgin Islands now because we do have a lot of providers on the mainland. I'm not saying that we have enough, but we're not struggling to develop an identity on the mainland. We're not having the very same fights with the psychologists on the mainland, at least to a particular degree. We're not being we're not our rights to practice are not threatened on the mainland, at least from my pocket of Georgia. I can't speak to the other states, but in the Virgin Islands, we're having a difficult time in doing the work that we need to do it in the scope at which we're trained and educated to do it. So that is truly where the advocacy can come in. There is a grassroots organization that put a link together for people to get involved and sign up and lend your voice to the movement. Certainly follow us to find out what we're doing in the Senate. We have a hearing on the 23rd of this month on St. Thomas in the Senate, talking about that very same cause. What is our scope of practice and how can we create pathways to allow the locals to be licensed in the Virgin Islands without having to leave, get on a plane, spend 3 years on the mainland at an institution, having to spend resources or find resources they may not want, they may not have access to, or simply don't want to leave their home. People shouldn't have to leave home if we have the ability to do so. With online schools, there's no way where we're forcing someone to get on an airline to be educated elsewhere when it can be done on our home. So those are the challenges that we have. And if we're able to get the voice and the unity behind the board in ensuring that we're able to practice at our full scope, I think that's a major step in moving forward.
Great, that sounds good. You are obviously doing all the work, and you're doing all the necessary work and putting in the steps to advance the profession, particularly in the VI. And so I commend you for that. Commend you for your advocacy and for kind of pulling others together to help advance the counsel profession in VI. And so I want to thank you for that. As we begin to wrap up, any final words or closing comments you would have for our audience?
Absolutely. I simply wanted to thank you and AMHCA for lending your support to the cause. There is absolutely strength in numbers. And as passionate as I am and the board is, we certainly cannot do this alone. So the board extends gratitude to our our partners who've recognized the cause, understand how significant this is, and here every step of the way. And you have been a big support of ours. And I thank you for coming to be a part of this process.
Thank you for allowing us to be a part of the process. You know, there's a slogan that we've heard during the COVID-19, which says, we're stronger together, we're better together. And indeed, we truly are. And so AMHCA will continue to lend its voice and lend its support to the counselors in USVI so that you can practice within your scope. And that's what we're here for, to work together, to partner together, to advance the profession, all to advance and improve the quality of lives for those in the community. And that's important that we keep that at the forefront. So thank you, Dr. Constantin, for being a guest on our podcast called Perspectives.
Thank you, Dr. Smith.
Thank you for joining the American Mental Health Counselors Association podcast with President and Interim CEO/ED, Dr. Beverly Smith. We hope you will join us for the next episode to connect and hear the perspectives from experts and the organization that exclusively represent clinical mental health counselors. Be well.